Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review A Walk Among the Tombstones. So, this, of course, is a Liam Neeson film because poster, but really, for this film, there's a reason why a Liam Neeson film is soon to be coming to Netflix, hence why I would say don't go on to Vudu, don't go on YouTube and rent this film. Go out of your way to wait till it comes on Netflix and then watch it conveniently. This movie's actually okay or a good Liam Neeson film. It is a slow slog of a film, but there is a theme called Taken that seems to be happening within this movie also. We have people who are getting napped while they're not napping within this film, and Liam Neeson he's not having it. He's just like, no, like, you have kidnapped too many people, no more. And so Matthew, who plays a private investigator, not a just cop, he's a private investigator, and we find out why he is to just be a private investigator. He kind of has like a backstory similar to the cop from Die Hard who has those Twinkies, and a lot of people are like, hey, that's the Family Matter dad. Yeah, the Family Matter dad. The Family Matters dad. If I can say that correctly. Anyways, so Matthew meets a guy through an AA meeting, which leads Matthew to forcibly start looking into this case, which turns into Matthew trying to find a possible connection, and immediately is to find what is to be, of course, the next case that is to pop up. And we then have Matthew, who kind of takes the reins and is talking to these men who are to have taken someone. And so Matthew is kind of negotiating and trying to figure things out of like where he can kind of send these people, as if he's done this a million times, which he really hasn't. Like, this is a build of a film, but I like the complexity, I like the story, and we already have Matthew that just meets this kid called TJ, and then there's like a lot of just there's just a lot of eating up of time with both Matthew and TJ in this film, as if they're like Batman and Robin in this movie. No offense to Batman and Robin, but that's who they are. If Batman and Robin watched this video, I'd be surprised. Anyways, yeah, so really that's kind of the teeing up of this film. It's going to be conveniently on Netflix. Let's just go out of our way to say that it's about that time again, to just go into spoilers about this movie. So yeah, with that said, let's just double five that bad boy up, because I think it's just about that time. Just go into spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, like I said, we have Matthew, who of course is in an AA meeting because he was a police officer and he was drinking on the job, and all of a sudden we have a number of men that decide to rob this bar. Liam Neeson chases after him, or Matthew chases after him, tries to kill a number of these men, and I'm going to reveal now why Matthew is to be this private investigator. Because Matthew is to go on and have this bullet ricochet, and it accidentally kills a little girl, forcing then Matthew to decide, well, like, you know what, I'm done. Like, I'm done being a police officer. And Matthew then decided that he is to have stopped drinking also. So, hence the AA meetings. So, Matthew meets a guy named Peter, and Peter, of course, is telling Matthew, "Hey, I have a friend, like I have a brother of mine, and like he has a story to tell, and this and that, and like Matthew kind of feels obligated to help this guy because both of them are kind of in the AA meeting, and Peter, I guess, was some artist who had used his own blood at some point to paint this Picasso painting in this bathroom somewhere. It's like, okay, that's quite a story. So Matthew goes on to meet with Peter to see what Kenny's story is. What's the tale? What's the spinning twine that you're gonna go on and give me? So Matthew goes on and sits, listening to a guy named Kenny mention that his wife at one point had gone missing. So Matthew immediately asks Kenny, it's like, well, hey, what do you do for work? Like, why do you have so much money? And Kenny's like, well, I'm a construction worker. And Matthew's like, well, what kind of construction worker? He's like, well, I work on houses. It's like, Kenny then reveals that he actually is to be a drug dealer of sorts. And then Matthew's like, okay. All right. So Kenny has this story about his wife, who of course is to go missing. And so what happens is we have this man who we find out is to be called Ray, that is with another guy nabbing a woman with this van that has seemingly a number of different logos or things on the side of it. Because every time Matthew is to go on to a part of town where this story may be familiar, every single time the logo on the side of the van is completely different. So we find out that these guys consistently paint this van over and over and over again with a different kind of logo, because we have these guys that are very particular about how they do things. So Kenny goes on and is supposed to pay these men $1 million. And Kenny's like, well, I don't have $1 million. And Ray is like, well, okay, how much money do you have? Kenny's like, 400,000. And Ray is like, well, that sounds good. So Kenny is to go on and pay these men off. And they keep telling him that, oh yeah, like, your wife is going to be in your car, your wife is going to be at your house, your wife is going to be blah, blah, blah. So Kenny finally does find his wife, and she's in pieces in the back of this car somewhere. Kenny opens it up, realizes that this is an actual person, and Kenny is just like, I just want to find these people. Like, finding my wife, too late, but I want to find these guys who did this. So Matthew is just like, like, okay, I'll take the case. So Matthew is starting to ask around about this story, and here's where we start to get different people with different kind of things, sides of vans with different logos and stuff like that. So Matthew starts asking further and further and is to go on and read these newspapers and is to bump into a kid named TJ, who I guess is a homeless guy or a homeless kid. Matthew is to notice that this kid has like an artist kind of thing about him. So Matthew is asking TJ, it's like, well, hey, you can probably help me out with this case. Uh, and TJ is like, well, I can help you out from over here. Like, I don't trust guys. Like, I've had certain guys try to take advantage of me in the past. Paraphrasing, of course, through this review. So it seems that TJ is to go on and look some stuff up, and it helps Matthew's case. And TJ, of course, is like, well, hey, my time is valuable. And Matthew's like, well, really? Like, how much is your time worth? Kid says $10. Matthew gives him 20. So Matthew is also saying, it's like, well, hey, I'm hungry. You want a burger? TJ, of course, is to say that he's like, well, like, I don't eat burgers. And so Matthew's like, well, okay, goodbye. We find out that actually TJ is a vegetarian. And so they do go to this diner, and TJ is to drink water and have pancakes, and the waitress is like, hey, you want a pop, Sonny? TJ is just like, no, I'm not going to drink. No, I'm not going to drink that soda. No. So, like, he mentions like the stuff that's inside the sodas and whatever that's unhealthy and vegetarian. It's like, all right, cool. So now that I've kind of gotten that stuff out of the way, Matthew is to find out that there was a guy in a graveyard who had a number of bags in some lake or some like pond. Matthew goes on to find this guy named Jonas, who was to find these bodies. And so Matthew is asking Jonas questions, and this guy is kind of giving Matthew flack. And he's like, hey, like, great that some police officer just came here. Like, I was hoping to get some like somebody to do a ride along with me because I'm working on my book. So Matthew's like, well, I'm not that kind of cop. So Matthew asks the story about the body parts that are all over this this little pond. And so Jonas had to go on and fish them all out. And he just chucked them all into these bags. Or he just chucked them all into this trash because really he just thought it was kind of common trash because everybody leaves their rubbers or any number of other kind of trash, just kind of they chuck it in there. And Jonas didn't have any second thoughts about like what could possibly have been in those bags. But someone else was to go on and find what was inside those bags, and so they called the police because they opened one of them. So Matthew is to find Jonas very suspicious. So Matthew just starts following Jonas. While Matthew is following Jonas, he realizes, Matthew does, that he also is being followed. So TJ, of course, is following Matthew. And Matthew kind of waits behind this one, I think like SUV or UPS truck, and grabs TJ. He's like, "What are you following me for?" TJ, I guess, took a note of all the stuff that Matthew was going to, like churches and a number of other places. Just like, hey, like I know an Amish person that has like more flavor in their life. So I guess Matthew doesn't believe in cell phones. So I guess there was a an interesting reason why Kenny was just slide Matthew his phone number, because this guy doesn't actually have a cell phone. So I'm like, okay, like so that made a lot of sense for the early part of this story. So Matthew then finds Jonas at this top of this building, where it seems that Jonas is to go on and feed these birds. And there also is to be this room. And Matthew breaks into it and is to look underneath this bed to find a number of photos there. So Jonas walks in on Matthew looking through his stuff. Jonas has this knife. Matthew kind of turns and Matthew kind of talks to Jonas like, yeah, like you really gave it away really easy that you're kind of this kind of kind of guy, this kind of very unsavory character. So like you were very suspicious to me. As of course Jonas is asking like, well, what gave me away? So Jonas is to have a connection with the two other men. Of course, both Albert and Ray. Jonas is to have gone to this secret place where he is to bump into these two men. They start talking, they start having a conversation. Jonah is to realize that these guys have a number of paperwork that all have DA stamps, and they have this police walkie. And so Matthew's like, well, like, did they tell you they were police officers? And Jonas is just like, well, like, there was no badge, there was no nothing. Like, all I just saw was the paperwork and the walkie. I just kind of figured it out. And so Matthew is just like, well, could you take me to the place that you went to? And Jonas is like, well, sure, after I go and feed my birds. So, because we find out even more so that Jonas, for the early stages, was the wheelman for these two other men. But once they got started, and we find out that these people that both Albert and Ray were taking, and they were hurting them, Jonas, I guess, realized like how bad this was probably going to get, and so Jonas just ran off. These guys never found Jonas, they never went after him. They just, it's like, okay, well, he's out. So Jonas, before he goes the way he goes, Jonas tells Matthew that one of the guys' names was Ray. And then he decides to take a plunge off the side of this building, and Jonas is dead. So Matthew makes it back to Kenny. And so Matthew is realizing that these guys are possibly DEA agents, and that Matthew is thinking that if Kenny is to have some connections with a number of other guys locally that are kind of wheeling and dealing some kind of coke, that Matthew is thinking that any number of those other guys at some point are going to start losing people at some point. So Matthew is telling Kenny, hey, get everybody that you know on the phone, call them, and kind of ask any number of them if anybody's gone missing, because it's going to happen. It's going to happen soon to someone else. So that, of course, leads us to have Matthew find out that another person is to have someone of theirs get taken, which is to be their daughter, and it's a guy named Yuri, whose daughter is getting taken. So Matthew goes with Kenny and Peter, probably TJ too, I don't know, a number of people. So they all go to Yuri, and so this time around, Matthew is kind of taking the reins. It's not Yuri who's being on the phone and Matthew's telling them all what to do. Matthew's taking the phone, talking to these guys, because Matthew is telling Yuri that his daughter is probably already dead. So Matthew is saying that they want proof of life that this girl is still alive. So Matthew is kind of talking to these guys like garbage. He's talking like, well, he's kind of cussing at them and saying all this stuff because he doesn't give a shit. Like, this girl is probably already dead. So Ray calls Matthew back, and we kind of confirm why Ray doesn't want any of the people that they nap by the phone, because we find out that this guy is doing this all through a payphone. Matthew hears in the background that this guy is to need another quarter while they're talking, and Matthew is just like, well, hey, like, do you need another quarter? Do you need like, give me your phone number so I know exactly, I can call you back from that. So I can also trace the number, because I can do that. Ray, when talking to Matthew, is wanting to figure out how Matthew is connected to all this. And so Matthew is to mention that he was connected to Kenny's wife, and now he's here with these people. And so Ray is like, well, does that make you like a cop? Does that make you police? And Matthew's like, no, it doesn't. And so, but like, Ray is just kind of interested. He's kind of curious of like, but it never gets there. So Matthew wants proof of life, and so he asks Ray to ask this girl about the previous dogs that this family was to have. Yuri, of course, says that they have a Rottweiler, and I think the name of the dog is Spot, and the other dog, which the girl wasn't exactly familiar with, had this Russian name. So that the girl wasn't even really sure about. So Matthew talks to Ray and delivers these names of these dogs and what they were, and Matthew's kind of looking to Yuri, and Yuri's like, it's like, all right, so she's still alive. So Matthew plans out the handoff, which is to, of course, be through a number of payphones at this point. Like, Ray is at some like laundromat payphone somewhere, I guess, to try to prevent them from tracing the call, because Ray and Albert are probably thinking that they're dealing with some like cop. And so we have Matthew that tells him, it's like, oh, okay, well, you guys can go and deliver this kid at this graveyard because you guys obviously know where this graveyard is because you dropped off a body there before. So there's also one part of this film where Matthew is consistently getting followed around by this white van. That's to say that it's some, I think, uh, East Valley or West Valley plumbing van. So Matthew calls up an operator, and of course is asking like, "Hey, do you guys have this like East or West Valley plumbing company? Do you have the number for that?" And they're like, "I'm sorry, sir, but that doesn't exist. There isn't a number of that." So Matthew's like, "Okay." So at some point, Matthew continues to get followed by this plumbing van, and all of a sudden there's to be a man that is starting to follow Matthew, and so this guy walks by. Matthew's hidden behind this door, smashes through the door, kind of breaks this guy's nose. We find out that this van was to be some FBI van, possibly trying to figure out this case. And so they're kind of asking Matthew about things, and Matthew is not giving him anything. We also have these FBI guys. One of them is Stover, who is just saying that Matthew is to just be this, like, the equivalent of a postman, and they don't really understand what Matthew's doing. So, because he's just a private eye. So now that that's out of the way, Matthew tells these guys to go on and they can make it to this graveyard an hour ahead of time to kind of check things out to make sure like there isn't a sting operation or anything like that going on. Like there's going to be a number of cops swarming in or whichever, because they really want this handoff to happen. So now Matthew is asking Yuri, like, hey, what do you got as far as money goes? The guy is just like, well, like, I don't have much. Like, I can go and try to make some, like, counterfeit bills. If they want Coke, I can give them Coke, but that's all I got. And so Kenny is to mention that he has, like, 500 on him, and that's all that he really has. So we find out later that Kenny was to have actually had $1 million to give to these guys, but for Kenny, that was his nest egg, and he didn't want to give up that whole $1 million to just get wiped out by these guys. And Ray was to go on and say, it's like, well, yeah, that guy lowballed us, and we know that guy lowballed us. So Matthew kind of justified to Kenny, it's like, well, she was already dead anyways. So if you would have gave him that $1 million, you would have still found a corpse at the end of all this. So we continue on into this story. They make it to the graveyard. Liam Neeson goes and is to have these 2 bags of money. At one point, Ray and Albert are saying, it's like, well, hey, like you could see who I am. And Matthew's like, well, wear a mask. And Ray's like, well, the mask can be like restricting. And I'm like, oh my god, dude, like just freaking wear a mask. Who cares? Like, what are you thinking that like people are gonna like bum rush you and a million people are all gonna sudden just there's gonna be a swarming of a number of people. They're all like you're gonna have to like fight to the death. Just toss the mask off at any moment. Good grief. So, but I thought that was kind of funny. Like the more and more that these two would talk together, like there is some kind of weird, funny moments out of this. But like I like this bit of dialogue. Um, but we do at points have like Ray trying to be like really creepy and all this stuff, and Matthew's just like click, like I'm not gonna listen to this garbage. So they go on the hand, they have the handoff, and Matthew kind of zips up or zips open, not his fly, the bags, shows him the money. And like, okay, they take the money, they give the girl, they hand off the girl. Matthew is to find out that there's some fingers missing. Matthew's like, what's up with the fingers missing? And Ray was like, well, like, that was before this whole arrangement. So Matthew kind of rushes this girl off to her father. So Matthew and Ray are getting closer and closer together as Albert is counting the money. Ray is asking Matthew, it's like, well, hey, like, what's to kind of stop me from like taking you down right now? Matthew mentions that there is a rifle that is to be kind of eyeing him from a distance, because Peter, of course, is to have this kind of rifle out in the distance. And so maybe that will stop these two men. So Albert has mentioned that the money isn't real, they stiffed them, so kill them. So now we have this kind of this shootout. Everybody's starting to fire guns. We of course have Matthew that slips his gun out of his sleeve to shoot Ray. He shoots him in the chest, but he has a bulletproof vest on. While Ray is to kind of scramble back to Albert's van, he ends up getting shot even with his bulletproof vest on. And he's like, well, hey, I've never been shot before. So Peter is to actually get shot while Albert has his gun out. And so Matthew, Kenny, and rush to Peter. And so before Peter dies, he tells Kenny that he loved somebody. And so Peter tells Kenny that he loves somebody, and Kenny says, well, like, I love you too, Peter, as he dies. I think what was to be the real thing was that Peter was having an affair on Kenny's woman. Is I'm maybe thinking what happened there. Because these guys are brothers, so Kenny probably didn't want to know that because it doesn't matter because if Kenny was to have an affair with if Kenny was to realize his wife was having an affair, it doesn't matter because both Peter and Kenny's wife are both dead, so it doesn't matter. So Matthew then is going in with Kenny into this car, and they're like, where the heck is TJ? And Matthew's kind of worried because TJ can't go out in this kind of weather because TJ was to have this gun, and Matthew found out about it. And so TJ and Matthew are kind of having this whole discussion about this gun, and Matthew is telling TJ, it's like, well, you know what, since you have that gun all oiled up and everything like that, how about you just take that gun and just shoot yourself in the head? Why not? Just go on. Because you're just stupid by just having this gun just kind of just laying around. Like, eventually it'll come back to bite you. Fortunately, it does. TJ goes off to find these two other men that are coming after TJ. He's like, well, hey, where's my gun? Like, that's my favorite piece. So they beat up TJ. They take their gun back. TJ's in the hospital as Matthew goes back to his apartment complex, or like his hotel. Matthew finds out there's a message for him and is to go to this hospital to find out that TJ has a certain kind of blood and it has some connection to do with Africa. So, and I'm like, okay, that's a kind of unique story there with kind of like unique kind of blood. So that's when we have Matthew tell TJ about him accidentally shooting that girl and quitting the force. So Matthew calls TJ, and TJ is to find out where these guys live. And Matthew's like, great, all right. So Ray and Albert get home, and Ray is telling Albert to go in the bathroom to get this first aid kit, and Ray's never been shot before. Albert goes into the bathroom to take a whiz, not even giving a about Ray's body, and that he's shot. So Ray is just like, really? All right. So Ray takes care of himself. So now it really seems like both Ray and Albert are at a point where they're going to get caught soon. And so Albert decides to take out Ray by using this piano wire and suffocating Ray and killing him. For those of you that don't know piano wire, it's really, really tough. And so that's why a lot of people end up dead in movies with piano wire, because that's why in the Hitman game they have like piano wire, because that's freaking like it's crazy. I hate movies that have kind of like the whole wire thing. I would rather just if you have a knife, if you have a gun, that's great. It's a horrible way to kill somebody. So Ray, of course, is to be dead. So these guys make their way in, and they see Albert. They realize Ray is dead. Albert is to be cuffed to this heater. And so they're all kind of looking around. They're all kind of checking on things. Kenny at one point is looking around to kind of see what items he can use to possibly kill Albert, because I'm sure that was his plan all along. So by the time that he gets back up there, Matthew is to make his way back into the room, finding Kenny dead, and now Matthew is just kind of like, okay, where's Albert? Matthew knows, like, and senses like somebody's behind him, so Albert is to dust out the wire again, and Matthew is to kind of catch it and is to try to shoot behind him with this gun to kill this guy off, leading Albert to just kind of throw this guy onto this table. And so they're kind of struggling. We have Albert with this cleaver and tries to get at Matthew. And Matthew grabs this taser, tases Albert. Albert falls over. numerous tasing in. We have Albert who tries to grab this one item, and Matthew shoots Albert in the head. I'm assuming after that, we have Matthew that is to talk to the police about what had all happened, fill out reports, blah, 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 blah. Matthew makes his way home to find TJ on his couch, kind of sleeping. And so Matthew kind of just goes in this chair and just kind of rests because I'm sure he's exhausted from all that he had to do. So that's how this movie just kind of fizzles off and ends. It's kind of really interesting how, like, I'm kind of really glad that I can kind of quickly review movies because, man, there's been some times when I'm just like, man, like I'm already like 50 minutes in or 2 hours in and whatever, and I'm just like, ugh. But like it's kind of nice to have these kind of short reviews, even though again, it's just kind of a nice relief to have kind of shorter reviews. And I know a lot of people are like, yeah, I like a shorter review also, blah blah blah. It's okay because at the end of the day, like it's also kind of nice to like kind of do a film that I actually did enjoy. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.